So, welcome everybody to this session on future learning. If you didn't want to be in a session on future learning, this is your opportunity to gracefully make an exit and find the correct room. But if this is what you selected, then congratulations on a very good choice. I haven't really got much to do other than to introduce Stephen and to make sure we finish on time for you to have lunch and get in the queue as quickly as possible. But just a few words just to get us started. I know Stephen wants to run an informal session. He'd like you to get involved. If you do have things to say, you don't need to wait until the end to do that. I presume the reason you're here is because you know about Stephen and his work, because you probably have read his bio. But just a few highlights. Steve must have a pretty big business card because he has some pretty impressive job titles to fit on it. I know you run your own organisation, Heppell.net, Steve, but I like your chair in New Media Environment Centre for Excellence in Media Practice at Bournemouth University. That really is an impressive title. But funnily enough, Steve, although Steve and I both have a long history of learning technologies, I don't think we've ever actually met before, and I've never seen Stephen speak, but I know that this was going to be a very special session for everybody. And I was looking back through some of the things that Stephen's been involved with and some of the accolades he's got. Microsoft called him Europe's leading online education expert back a few years ago. He was the founder of the Ultra Lab, which I remember very well, back in the 1980s, doing things that we would probably find innovative now in 2012. And with some illustrious peers, Stephen is an Apple master, which doesn't mean, I gather, that you're a connoisseur in drinking cider or anything like that. But clearly to get recognition from Apple is very prestigious. He's the Royal Television Society. He got the Judges Award for Lifelong Services to Educational Broadcasting. And he was also called the most influential academic of recent years in the field of technology and education. So if that doesn't set you up, Stephen, then I can't think of anything else, but over to you anyway.
No, gosh, thanks for that. That's, but what do they all know, eh? Gosh, well, where to start, really? I think I'll start with, I'll take you back in time a little bit to, do you remember this from your school days? Remember this? The question here was A longer or B longer, or were they both the same? Let me just, since you're looking vaguely responsive after coffee, who thinks A is the longest here? And who thinks B is the longest here? And who thinks they're both the same? That's all very encouraging. It's wrong, of course, but it's encouraging. Just really wanted to do that with learning for you because where you thought you were with learning, what you thought you knew about it, where you thought you were with training, I suspect is not where we are. And I'm getting on a bit. You're right. But 35 years of research in this area. I can't think of a project that's failed, which is fairly scary because I think that would indicate that the baseline is pretty low. But I'd honestly say the projects that have been the most successful that I've been involved in have been the ones that have terrified me, the ones where I've woken up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, probably thinking, Stephen, you've gone and done it this time, you've gone way too far. Those are the ones that have just about been about right. And I guess that's an interesting world for us because what's happening, of course, is that everything that technology touches strokes in an exponential way. It doesn't matter whether you're looking at the speed of decoding the human genome or whether you're looking at the adoption of mobile phone technologies or whatever else. Everything technology touches goes exponential, and that's just starting to happen with learning. Only just. I was just I'll come to some old learning technologies in a moment, but that old model of piloting and iteration and doing tests, reaching conclusions, legislating has clearly gone. Pace of change is remarkable, and it's one that's being driven from the bottom up. I put 21,000 head teachers together online some years back, the Talking Heads, wonderful community big part of changing the way teaching and learning happened in UK schools now. Where is the leadership? It's probably right now at the bottom of that pyramid in a really interesting way. I've talked to successful CEOs, I've talked to successful head teachers. They'll tell me it's their senior management team that are actually leading the organisation. When I talk to them, they'll point to innovative departments. When I go into the innovative departments, I find they're pointing to the 25 to 35-year-olds, people who chose to do what they were doing at a time of really full employment, and as whether they're teaching or training or whatever else, they're passionate about it. And when I talk to them, they say we're only good because we're listening to the children or the students or the clients or whatever else. And suddenly the pace of change is being driven from the bottom up, and how we keep up. You will have noticed just early January, Michael Gove, Secretary of State for Education, much criticised in many quarters, but I thought rather encouragingly standing up and saying, look, I've looked at what children are doing with ICT in schools. I've talked to them and they've told me it's boring. I've talked to employers and they've told me it's irrelevant. I don't know what you ought to be doing, he said, but would you sort it out? And by the way, we start in September. So, here's a minister, unashamedly saying he's talked to kids and employers, and can we build an open source curriculum in 9 months? And would universities and companies and schools and children and parents crack on with doing all that? That's huge distance from where we were 10 years ago. And in the end, it's all about trust and sharing, the pace of sharing, or great sharing tools, of course. But that's a very different place to be. And of course, you don't need me to spell out the speed of all this, but just to jump back to a bit of ancient history, here's a moment from my past. I apologise for looking a bit younger in this clip.
Well, how would you do that with this thing?
You would go over here and click on it.
Right.
Then you tell the computer it's a sound.
So it knows there's a sun coming,
Yes.
does it?
And then you go over to 15, click on it, and then you press this button here.
Right. What's that button? Yes.
That's the share by button.
Share button, that's it.
So, here's a 9-year-old girl, building spreadsheets. This was the year Multiplan came out, so not many people had seen spreadsheets at that point. She'd be in her mid-30s now, I think, roughly, if you do the maths, and did it matter that fabulous capability wasn't built on by the people who employed her, by the schools that she passed through? Well, it probably didn't, because things were moving pretty slow. I mean, that's 1985, that video was shot. Macintosh came out in 1984, and I think it was at least 2 years, maybe 3, before we had a colour one. So sort of 4 years debating whether colour would be, and I remember mathematicians saying, no, colour will be distracting, too much information, keep it simple. Now we go to what you've all seen, I'm sure, which is, small children having a great time with iPads. This is an 18-month-old boy doing a money sorting game and jumping up and down with excitement at, getting the numbers right. And just as the 8-year-old was chatting away and having to invent a vocabulary of functions, he's jumping up and down inventing a vocabulary of numerous. It raises a really interesting question about how soon and how fast, and in truth about how good children might be. And then you run that right the way up through the training arena, and you start wondering how good learning might be in the corporate sector. And the truth is, it could be stellar. And I think that's really the focus of what I wanted to say to you for much of today. Let's look at some trivial examples, really. This is something from a long way back, where we had children walking the streets of Norwich in the early days of GPS, painting on the streets of Norwich. They'd leave a trace behind, and they were trying to draw a Viking ship here on the streets of Norwich, if you see what I mean. So that's quite a complex task, in terms of mapping. You've got to think, where do you go? And you can see, I think, that they got themselves into a bit of trouble with crossing the road at the wrong point there. They were going to do a sort of wiggly line, because they quite liked the idea of the shields down the side of the boat, but it was all flipping dangerous because it was the rush hour, so they decided not to cross over quite so often. And lovely ideas, and the kids pass them out to each other. And I was just in Australia, spent quite a lot of time in Australia at the moment, just before Christmas, and bunch of kids mailed me this, where they'd been out, they'd borrowed the idea, they built on it, they passed it round, and you can see they've built themselves, using their iPhones in this case, they built themselves a Christmas tree with the GPS track in the park where they live, and not just a Christmas tree, but it's got a string of lights on it, little light bulbs. You know, it's really, really detailed, and you know, one gets passed on to another, gets passed on to another. You won't find any of that in the literature. You won't find chapters in educational journals. You know, I'm a professor in England, in Bournemouth and in Madrid in Spain, and you won't find in the educational journals in either any reference to this sort of stuff at all. But this is, you know, 10 years of work by children, 5 years of work really by children, building on each other's ideas, and suddenly the thing is moving at an extraordinary pace. What you see in the corporate sector, of course, suddenly is the dramatic realization that, and this happened a little in the last recession, but boy, did it happen in this recession, the sense that actually the training budgets and training managers and training rooms and training resources we've got aren't going to deliver on learning. And you know, if I stand on the roof of Olympia, look around West London, I cannot see an organisation other than is aspiring to be a learning organisation. They don't know how to do that. They know how to train. Ironically, some of the least successful schools, and there's a gap opening rapidly between schools that are being brave and schools that aren't. But some of the least successful schools are trying to deliver on their targets by re-invoking a model of training. You know, you go into schools and find kids doing predictable stuff day in, day out. Now, the problem with that is threefold. Firstly, the world we're in is a world that's full of the unexpected, and that's going to increase. And it increases because technology it is that takes us into these dangerous areas. I mean, nicely so, but it's a bit like Icarus. You know, the closer we sail to the edge, when things go wrong, the more catastrophic the consequences are. So that, you know, if I just go down the road and stand at Heathrow Airport, I'm working in a school just outside Heathrow on a project with students, which we'll have a look at in a moment. They're right under the flight path of Heathrow Airport, and you know, a plane goes overhead pretty much constantly. You go and stand in the field, you can see 4 planes in the air heading for the same runway. So when something goes slightly wrong, you know, just a whiff of volcanic ash, we don't have a strategy for that, because there's no slack left in the system. When we're drilling oil a mile down in the Gulf of Mexico, we can get the drilling, but we don't have a strategy for repairing it when it goes wrong. And of course, a bit of human error, you know, and so on and so on. And of course, you know, economically, the dear old banks, you know, of course, some of it was incompetence and greed, but bankers have always been incompetent and greedy. The big difference here was, you know, the building really, really complex models of economic behaviour, which really did pare to the last inch, last centimetre, the margins of success and failure. When it went wrong, it went spectacularly wrong. You know, I do work in the Midwest, out around between Chicago and Detroit, and I mean, you drive through Detroit now, parts of Detroit, it's like a post-apocalyptic movie. People are literally taking up paving stones and growing vegetables in some of the back streets. I mean, quite extraordinary stuff. So the world you're facing is one where you have that certainty of uncertainty, or you know, the corporate environment will be hit by wave after wave of unexpected catastrophe, and how you cope with it is absolutely key. And how you cope with it will depend entirely on the learning environment in the institution. Look, I do work with quite interestingly with the British Olympic team, with Sport England. And I'm working with the elite coaches, and I'm working focused, by the way, on Rio, not on 2012. 2012, done and dusted. Rio is the problem. And one of the things that I think everybody's starting to realise is that we know how to make great athletes. You know, we know about the physiology, we know about the nutrition, we know about the tactics, we know about everything. But the bit that puts you on the podium in the end is your ability to cope with the unexpected on the day. You know, and you see it with the Winter Olympics. You just think back to the Brendan Foster era. You know, when Britain had great middle distance runners. You know, the commentator would tell you how he was going to run. He's going to do 2 fast laps, and then he's going to, you know, incredibly predictable. And then, you know, somebody would appear, you know, a Kenyan would go whizzing past prodigious rate, you know. Brenda would have to make the decision about was that person just genuinely fast, or were they, you know, a pacemaker that had gone wrong, or were they just there to confuse the whole thing? He didn't know, and it was really hard to cope. So coping with the unexpected has produced some really quite interesting results. This was the Olympic venue for the sailing for Qingdao for the Beijing Olympics, and you know the data from there was absolutely solid. You know, 10 years of data. There is no wind in August. You know, it didn't matter how you looked at it. It was a windless venue, and certainly some of the Olympic teams approaching it were on starvation diets, just trying to get their body weight down. The American star sailor arrived with a boat that was, you know, tank designed short to cope with, to minimise wetted area for very, very light conditions. Normally, you know, the physics of sailing is waterline length is fast, so, but wetted area dominates when the wind's light. So he had a short boat, minimum wetted area, and 2 days into the regatta was leading the regatta by a country mile. But what everybody had failed to allow for was that Chinese had great technology. They had technology which allowed them to turn off the smog. It was called shutting the factories. And they turned off the smog, and you'll remember your school geography. You know, the minute the smog turns off in August, the land heats up. And the land heats up, you get strong thermal breezes. You see it everywhere in the world. You know? So hot air rises, the wind blows in. This is one of the races in that Olympic regatta. That's a British boat there, by the way, standing on end. And it turned out to be one of the windiest regattas in Olympic sailing history. And a wonderful quote from the American team, from the guy who'd arrived with the super fast light weather boat. He said, well, you can see, we expected the unexpected, but blimey, we never expected this. The trick here is to be able to cope with the unexpected unexpected. You know, I'm going to dust off that Donald Trump stuff for you, but the trick is to be able to cope with all that. And clearly in learning terms, we don't do that by preparing children at the early stage to, you'll remember your own school experiences, sitting in an exam room and saying to yourself, I hope there's no surprises on the exam paper. Or your teachers would have been outside thinking, gosh, I hope I've prepared them for everything. You know, we absolutely know that that's impossible. So it raises a really interesting question about what test, what assessment might there be for, are you ready for the unexpected? And sort of throw you into a room. And curiously, at a time when our television is awash with learning, learning has never been more cool, more hip. You turn on the television, people learning to dance, learning to sing, learning to do everything. But you look at what's happened to our game shows. Our game shows have gone from the old predictability of the, you know, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, University Challenge thing, to putting people in small rooms and presenting them with the unexpected and seeing how they cope. There's an innate sense in the population that being able to cope with the unexpected and doing it from a platform of learning and understanding is key. So I'm just signalling this is the most extraordinarily interesting time for learning, and I find that personally kind of exhilarating. Here's another little reflection, perhaps, of where we are corporately, and I guess most people are looking for ways to make progress and to do it for less money. And this certainly would be universities, schools, companies. But the tough call here is, you know, we can't go back. You can't do it the way you used to do it in the 1980s or the 1990s or even the early 2000s. No possibility to go back. So the world has simply moved on. 2.2 million jobs from home in the UK at the moment. 1 in 7 in south of England working from home in a really interesting way. So there is no way back. You know, you're not going to build a corporate headquarters on the assumption that everybody turns up on the same day and sits down. So, you know, we're already in a different place. But if you can't go back, then one solution would be the productivity solution. And we've, particularly, I think, in our corner of Europe, you know, we've asked people to, we've said, gosh, would you mind just working a little harder for a little longer? I mean, in Madrid, you know, we have proper long lunches. You know, people sit down for a couple of hours. You know, here, if you graze a sandwich at your desk, you're doing well. Well, the trouble with the productivity card is you can only really play it once. Once you've asked people to work harder and longer for less, you can't go back and say that went really well Would you mind giving up your lunch break? Again, it's already gone. Would you mind staying a little later? They already are. Would you mind coming in a bit earlier? They're in the building. Bournemouth University, I'm workaholic. I'm on campus 7:30 in the morning. Our students are on campus. I didn't leave last night until well into the evening. The students are on campus, and they're on campus just in passing because it turns into employment. We had 52 students working on Avatar, the movie, which I'm sure you all seen, highest grossing movie of all time, and half the production team were university students, and Framestore just moved on to campus because now they're so keen to work alongside the students. People don't want to wait until our students graduate. They want to be there and use them before they graduate, because when they graduate it all gets a bit competitive. You have to pay them a lot of money, whereas if you rock up and build your production faculty on campus, you can employ students for a lot less money and get really fresh thinking. But you can only play that card once. They've still got to sleep in the end. When all the slack's gone, So, another strategy you've got, of course, is just let somebody else do it. Outsource, move it on, get somebody else to run the organisation. Well, I think we're on the return path from massive outsourcing for a heap of reasons that we haven't really got time to go into. But if you can't go backwards and you've played the productivity card once and you don't want to let somebody else do it, the only game left in town is, let's see if we can do it differently. Let's see if there's another way of doing it. And that's where we are. That's where we are with our schools, with our universities, with our companies. And you can absolutely see who's going to survive and who isn't, because the ones that are going to survive are down there in that bottom space, saying, let's look at a couple of examples. Let's tiptoe off into playful learning for a moment. And I've been doing some interesting work with air traffic controllers, looking at the air traffic controllers curriculum. And I don't know if any of you are involved in this space as well, but there's a heap of stuff to learn. And people don't learn it very well. The pass rates are dismal. So they're hugely expensive courses because, in one instance I came across, barely 80%, 80-something percent were failing, and barely something a little less than 20% were actually getting through the course. Well, you think it's residential components, these are expensive courses. How might we do it differently is a really interesting question. There is just a lot of stuff you need to know. And I apologise if any of you have flown here, but I've had the fun of listening to the crisis tapes on the air traffic control deck, when things go wrong. And it's pretty daunting stuff, but essentially it's people trying to remember what they've forgotten and trying to map that onto an unexpected set of. So one of the thoughts, of course, was to make it more playful, because we know that playful learning is hugely effective. And come back to that with the school sector. So, ripped off the doors from the seminar rooms, and we put on the doors from old aircraft just to make it a bit more fun. The place where people sit is decked out like an aircraft. They sit and have their lunches in there on little plastic trays, and I think it's very jolly. The aircraft recognition stuff, which at the end of 4 weeks residential, people still couldn't remember. And that's quite important, because you send your plane round again, is that the one with the long-range tanks? I don't know. Send it round again, we'll know in a minute, is not really the answer you're looking for. So what we did there was to turn the echo recognition into a set of trump cards, which I'm sure you all played as kids, top trumps. And, curiously, in one evening, well, in two, I suppose, with quite a lot of beer and some money, everybody learned every single detail. Really well. It was a tough, competitive game, and it went on and long into the night, and that was it. They'd learned enough. It got to be more interesting even when we started thinking, blimey, I wonder what we know about learning from primary schools that would work with these folks. So we knew, for example, that spaced learning was very effective. Lots of good research about this. If you're trying to remember something with a lot of detail in it, you remember it for a bit, and then you pause and you do something fairly mindless. I throw a ball to you, you throw it to her, you throw it to him, he throws it back. We have a pattern. I throw another ball in, we try to repeat the same pattern. I don't need to think about it, but I sure as heck need to concentrate. If I do that for 5 minutes and then go back to my learning, in the meantime, the brain's done all the housework on the neural pathways, and it's built little internal taxonomies, and it's tidied up your thinking, and magically you remember stuff the schools in England that have been trying this lately. I was talking to one up in the Midlands where they've been trying it, and they had a kid who'd missed the entire exam, 2 years of the exam, but was there for the 5-week revision course. And he did the 5-week revision course and came out with an A in the exam. And all he did was a revision. And the other kids were saying, hang on a minute, you know, he just passed the whole thing in a 5-week revision thing, so 2 periods a week. You know, why did we do all the other stuff? Because there are better ways of learning. So we've applied some of this, and, you know, and we've applied, you know, closed procedure. We have to remember and reveal the missing words. Actually, Edward was doing some of that in his session earlier, wasn't he? So, and we found all that was spectacularly effective. And then it got really interesting. So we thought, blimey, I wonder if there are things that air traffic controllers do. Oh, hang on a second. What if there are things that air traffic controllers do that they're really good at that we could use as a diagnostic, really? So, and we're in the middle of this work at the moment, but it's been kind of interesting. So we set them, we took people who've been successful air traffic controllers and had a look, just gave them a whole mass of stuff to do, entirely at random. Oh look, that's taking a bit of a moment to load. I wonder if I've probably got a faster version of that here somewhere. Maybe here. Yeah. Oh, here we go, it's just loading. So we got them to play online games. I mean, this one, for example, you know, you imagine if you were trying to fill that tile. You know, you're looking for a tile with you know, a purple on the top and a grey on the side and an orange on the side, and you've got to try and find it over here. Look, it's that one there. But they were astonishingly quick with that. They just went dub, 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 you know, really, really fast. And then when we asked them to, this was interesting, we asked them to pattern match. You know, you see the objects, they're there for just a couple of seconds, then they're gone, you have to put them back. And they put them back, they put these two back pixel perfect in relation to each other and these two, but they didn't have any relation, they didn't have any sub-relationship, if you see what I mean, and they weren't in the right place on the, so they grouped things, they saw the world in little groups and clusters, which is particularly helpful if you're a successful air traffic. Of course, they were good at air traffic control on the iPhone, you know. When we gave them Big Track, which is a little program, how many of you played with Big Track when you were younger? Oh gosh, about half of you. And they're in the shops again now, which is, it's come back as an executive toy because people who played with them at school now think, hey, that'd be quite cute in the office. Nowadays it comes with camera attachments and rocket launchers and all sorts of this. It's the same toy. I've never seen anybody as good as they were with this. I've worked with gifted and talented children, I've worked with young children, old children. They were just astonishing with it. They had no sense of calibration of how far or fast the thing would go. They didn't know. They just did a couple of calibration runs, forward, backward, left, right. They discovered it turned left by minutes of the clock. So left 90 was 15. Left 15 was a 90-degree turn, 15 minutes, 90 degrees. So they sussed all that out in about a minute and a half, and then they sat and sent the thing off around a big room, around all the boys that I'd parked. They had to rotate around different colours. Their first pass of it was almost perfect, and then rather than just, it stopped just short of the target. So rather than just adding one more step at the end, they reprogrammed the whole thing so it would arrive at the target in one elegant go. It was just simply astonishing. On the other hand, when I gave them a radio-controlled car, I've never seen anybody more dysfunctional at reversing. They were simply incapable of reversing to the point of laughter. The thing coming towards them, if I send it down round you and back, that left-right reversal that's really quite hard if you ever tried radio-controlled boats or cars or whatever, they didn't even realise that was a problem. When I said you're really good at that, they said really good at what? They had no sense that it was an issue for them. But go backwards, and they were... So, it raises really interesting questions when you start looking at people's innate capabilities and learned capabilities, whether that's a good predictor of their future successes. So our next pass at this is to get people who want to be air traffic controllers, give them radio-controlled cars, and if they're really bad with them, we'll give them a place on the course. If you see what I mean, it's going to be interesting to follow through, But if you look on the back of all that, if I look at the work, I do a lot of work in cinema these days, and if I look at the top film crews in almost anything, you have a look at Hugo, look at the stunning sort of opening, almost a 2-minute long sequence, choreography of that, how it's put together. You won't see good camera crew in major productions other than are profoundly dyslexic. Then they almost all are. and they just have a way of seeing the world that is fundamentally different. And you start to realise that this idea that there might be different ways of doing things, the precious, scarce resource that we have is people's diversity. It's the fact that they are different. And the catastrophe for many organisations is that the filtering model you have for application, limits immediately the most able and the most competent people, because they've got to go through a filtering system of, an interview and an application form and all those other things. So, smart organisations are starting to wake up to the thought that they might open the door way wider to people's capabilities and competence and get that diversity into the building that Edward was talking about a little bit earlier. It's really interesting stuff. And the spaces in which that learning happens, I think, are fascinating. Here's, this is a school, actually my daughter's school, she teaches there in West London, where the children won a competition to design a learning space of the future. This is Lambton School in Hounslow's outstanding school in a less than outstanding area, difficult area. And the kids won the money, £20,000, to make over the classroom. They made over, by the way, it looks like this is less than inspiring. I mean, many of you are involved in training spaces that are similar. The money they won because they did the hard research. They didn't just say, this isn't kind of learner voices, ask people what they would like. This was them saying, I wonder what's happening in the rest of the world. I wonder what the others are doing. I wonder what's out there that's seductive and engaging. I wonder what ingredients we might bring home to Hounslow that will build our great local recipe. And they picked a few. I'm just going to illustrate a couple. They picked a few. One was that every surface was a writing surface. Well, you've seen this in Google and Orange and some of the corporate play spaces, but they really loved the idea. They invoked a few simple rules, like you never clean off. So when you come in, you always see the patina of other people's work, and you have the excitement of what you might be doing next. And you see this image, chap writing on the wall behind us, the girls playing on her iPad. One of the ways that that's become possible, of course, is that suddenly every child's carrying a phone. And if you wrote on the desks before, it was all lost. It's great if you have a sense of audience when you write on the desk. It's a collaborative thing, works really well. Of course, you take your phone out and take a picture of it, and you've captured it in a way that, that would have been really quite hard to organise 3, 4, 5 years ago, which will return before the end to, okay, if every child's got their phone out, how does all that work appropriately? They also said, when we're reading, we want to relax. We don't sit in upright chairs to read. We want to be in comfortable seats. It's not, as I've said a million times on YouTube and elsewhere, there is no child on the planet when they're on holiday takes an upright chair down from the dining room to the beach so they can sit and read a book. It's just, they slump, they relax, they enjoy themselves. And the sort of chairs that you're in at the moment, probably the least conducive to reading on. If you had to design a chair that was not for reading, it would be an upright chair. And every child in every school is expected to sit in an upright chair and read. They're really bad chairs for collaboration as well. Office chairs are hopeless for collaboration. It's really quite difficult to turn and talk to the person alongside you. It forces you into kind of one-on-one behaviours. Well, the kids understood that, looked at the research. They also said, hey, look, we've seen this cool project in Yale University about the impact of colour on our emotions, and a bit of blue in the morning, a bit of red in the afternoon, or vice versa, will change our behaviours. The research report said, the kids said, well, actually, we don't believe the research, but we like the lighting, so we'll have some of that. And they put this sort of LED mood lighting into the place in a really quite interesting way. And so on and so forth. By the way, after 1 year, they found that the Yale work was pretty accurate. It did affect it. And they said, look, we needed, look at us, we're all different shapes and sizes. Why wouldn't we have a diversity of shapes and sizes of furniture too? How many times have I been into a corporate space where people are all sitting in identical seats and identical chairs? And I mean, why? Do you remember that time when we used to give everybody the same car? You used to get you would have a company car from the car pool, fleet car. And the Morris Marina was named because it was a fleet car, Marina Fleet, and so on. And then people realised that the sort of, if you were young and single, the last thing you wanted was a Morris Marina. If you'd got 7 kids, it really wasn't helpful to have 5 of them in the boot. So people were different. And now, of course, they just say, look, buy a car, sort it out, get there somehow. And if you don't get that, that's your fault. We don't expect to be employed. You know, we've passed the decisions about personalisation onto persons, not unexpectedly. But I don't see very much of that happening in the corporate sector still. And look, the mood light changes. And they said, by the way, you know, in our day-to-day lives, we use Facebook, we use Google Docs, we use stuff. You know, that surely would be part of what we're using in school too. And you can see they just built these pretty extraordinary space. Oh, and by the way, they have a Skype bar. So at the back of the class, when they want to work with other children around the world, they just walk up and sit down. They have a Skype bar. It's perfectly normal to chat with other people in other situations in other spaces. Now, these are the kids who are pouring through the school sector at the moment. And what happens to them is it changes their expectations. It changes their entitlements in a really interesting way. They're not going to rock up in an office. I've just been having a really interesting conversation with Microsoft saying, look, your brand is broken. If you stand in a corridor outside a school classroom, you'll hear the teacher saying, if you don't work harder, you're going to end up in an office as a threat. You know, it's the most dreadful possible scenario. And the kids are saying, all right, mate, I'll get my head down, you know, anything but that. And having a brand that says office is like having a brand that says prison. You know, it's not exactly, doesn't exactly grab people's attention. So I've been doing some interesting work, talking to children in these spaces about what their hopes and dreams are for learning beyond school. And this is some video we've been shooting at Bournemouth for university vice-chancellors, where we thought we'd ask these children what they're hoping their universities to be like. And it's pretty terrifying. So let's hear from them for a moment.
We're going to talk a little bit about university life, but tell me a little bit about this.
Just want to say I've lost a lot of weight since then. I feel really quite good about it.
Space, what's special? Yeah, what's special about this place?
Classroom was designed by students, so it was designed by people who are going to use it now and for future generations, and it incorporates a lot of the things that we use at home and technology we use at home and technology we're familiar with, and I think that helps, and I think that's what makes this classroom like really unique.
It's quite good for group work, so if we just want to move to our own space in the classroom and we need something to write, we don't have to search for paper and pen, and we can just get one of the board pens and write things down.
And I love the coloured light. Does the coloured light change during the day? How does that?
Yeah, they're mood lights, so they can change themselves or we can change the settings.
So you can set different mood colours. Yeah, very good. Do you think you'll get spaces like this in university?
But I think universities would have probably thought more about that because they're more experienced with students, maybe they're bigger and there's more students so they have more opinions.
I know that when I go to university there's going to be like a range of different types of learning styles, and I'll be able to choose the styles that I like to learn in, and it'll be more independent.
Which, I mean, who's going to tell them? You know, whether the future is from hell, you know, it's like Dante, they've slipped out of purgatory down to the deepest ring, you know. But that entitlement, let me say, carries on into the corporate space too. I love the sense that, well, actually, we designed this and there's only 6 of us. So when you get to university, it's full of smart people and they're bound to have asked everybody, so think how good it will be. Yeah, and corporate life is full of people who get paid to think, so think how good that's going to be. Is really interesting. And I do think we're at this really fascinating watershed where just like some schools aren't going to make it, and clearly many universities aren't going to make it, many corporations won't make it, they simply won't, they will filter the learning before they even realise. You know, they'll limit the people who come through the door because of their HR systems, they'll extinguish their learning because of their furniture, FF&E, they'll destroy any possibility of thinking outside the box because everybody is in a box in a really quite alarming sort of way. So I think it's a fertile time and in many ways quite a scary time. But look how quick this all changes. So I'm in November, I'm in Mark Oliphant School in Adelaide. I spent about 2 months a year in Australia these days, and I showed the school that classroom, and in fact we Skyped in just to say hi. And I did that at 2:30 on the Wednesday. I go back Thursday morning, and this is 9:30 on Thursday morning. And the kids have already gone off and found a set of desks that are white, and they've tested them with their whiteboard pens so they can write on them. And you can see they're writing on desks, sets of audience, looking at each other's work. They've got their shoes off, and by the way, almost every learning space that I'm involved with is a shoes off space. Thank you. it just flipping works, something about having your shoes off in learning, which, go to my website, there's a whole lot of stuff about shoeless learning, but it's genuinely hard to be naughty with your shoes off. As simple as that, really. And well, other reasons too. And the kids, by the way, you look at what they're writing about the impact of colour on their learning. So, 2:30 one day, 9:30 the next day, 4 major changes in the pace that they're moving. You get a sense of how fast this is all moving along. When I go to Twitter, which I noticed several of you are tweeting away, I found Lambton citizens, who were the children who built that space. This was quite exciting back in March. My first tweet was learning how to use Twitter, and I sent them a little note saying, "Oh, well done," and got back this slightly sniffy note from them saying, "That's not us, you fool. It's our teachers. We're teaching our teachers how to use Twitter so they can use our classroom." I have a PhD student, Andy Ted, who's looking at organisations and particularly in broadcasting. And his hypothesis is a simple one. It's, if you want to see an organisation that is going down the tubes, look for one that bans social networking internally. Because they will cut themselves off from so many. More than half my work is now directly through Twitter and Facebook. I'm a full-time person looks after me. She has to read and look at all my Facebook chats. I've got no secrets. I wish I did eventually, but she sees everything and knows everything because that. How many of you have done email in bed? Just a quick show of hands. So that, there you go. There's that. Who hasn't done email in bed? Got a cracking life going on there. Well done, you. But for 95% of us, there's been a crossover between your work and your social life. The productivity card's being played, and there we are. So organisations that think you can't do that because it's social and you can do that are just simply dropping the portcullis on huge amounts of significant people. Well, those organisations will not make it. So that raises the interesting question. Oh, flip! If we're back in that world, and nobody's interrupted, so I'm going to go to some questions in a moment. But if we're back in that world of of exponential change that we were talking about at the beginning, where the old model of as an organisation, let's pilot using Facebook in the post room, and see how it gets on, or worse still, we've seen Facebook, so we've developed our own corporate version of Facebook. It's like Facebook, except there's nobody there. That model's gone. So how do we build that trust? And I've been involved in a project with the Nominet Trust, where we've simply crowdsourced effective behaviour. The task, you just go to cloudlearn.net if you want to see all about it. But we've simply got out and said to ourselves, okay, schools all around the world are busy, adopting phones in the classroom, YouTube in the classroom, Facebook in the classroom, Twitter in the classroom. What are they doing and how are they doing it? And this is just a great set of advice. It's all the policy documents, the letters home, all the things that they've... Oh, isn't it interesting that where's this policy come from? It's come from the people who own the domains, Nominet, with their charitable trust, worried that locking or blocking was characterising some children's experience, and then a group of practising teachers being got together by a researcher and saying just swap, and it turned out they'd all discovered exactly the same thing. If you're using phones in the classroom, the standard rule is phones out on the desk, screen up. So a teacher walks in, you can see where the phones all are, you can see if they're being used or not. Simple. They'd all reach the same conclusion. So now 500 or so of them all say, here's our conclusion, give it to the world. And suddenly, I find that mobile phones are used in class in Denmark more than they're not used. I find that Facebook is now expected and used in Australian schools, particularly by teachers, particularly to communicate with parents. The world's changed really fast. If you'd have seen last night's Metro, though, on the Underground, you'd have seen they're talking about teachers in this country being dismissed for bad practice for communicating with their children through Facebook. Just strange and bizarre stuff. It's like the book burning, from the bad old days of medieval Britain. So I'm just flagging, really, as we come to some general questions, really, that this is a pretty exciting time. Things are moving really quickly. The crossover between the corporate sector moving from training to learning and the learning sector moving from formulaic learning to a learning that's full of surprise and unexpected, is the most fertile time I've seen. And I think why I'm excited about the new models of governance is that I know people are nervous that, oh look, there are companies running schools, but it seems to me that in doing so, they've both got a huge amount to learn from each other. You'd be nervous, I think, of people who've retired out of companies to run schools because they're not in that position where they're moving forward. But where companies are active and moving rapidly, I think I'd love the two to be in bed together. And you know, the school I'm involved with in Portland, down on well, one of many I'm involved with actually, but down on the English south coast. It's an island. It's got some great little schools. The performance is pretty dismal, but what we're building is a 0 to 21 institution. It's got no phase break. You start as a baby, you don't leave till you get a university degree, stage not age, you go as fast as you like. People are in little silos of organisational structure, which we've learned very much from the corporate sector, and schools within schools is a great buzz all around the world at the moment. Full data transparency. Everybody knows everybody else's stuff. There's no secrets at all. And it's research and practice led with an enterprise ethos. You know, that's, oh, and by the way, we're building it in the middle of a business park. And the businesses are, you know, and taking over a business park and a hotel. So the school is sat in the middle of what you would regard as full-on commercial property in a really interesting way. You look around London, look at the empty commercial property out there, and you look at what an opportunity there is for building shared learning spaces, you get a sense of just how hot this could be. But look, I've talked for ages. Let's go to, we've got a full quarter of an hour of questions. So ask me some specific stuff, and I'd be really pleased to flesh them out. One there and one there. I'll go there first.
Do you see modern learning as the end of the uniform cohort of students going through a learning environment?
Yes, I think uniformity has been a very narrow corridor, and I would say a separate thing perhaps about the school uniform. But no, certainly I would say that. You know, if you look at what people are doing, say, in what are they saying in China? You know, in China, here's the Minister of Education, Ken Chen, and I was at a conference with him, and he said this: we don't keep doing it the way we used to keep doing it. Otherwise, we won't stay top. You know, change on change on change, and perhaps even more interestingly, he said that. You know. And these aren't words you'd probably expect to hear from China, you know. And perhaps Ed would have been delighted, I think, this morning to have heard these words as well. And finally, he reminded everybody just down the road in Singapore, they're saying that, you know. So the sense that we might quality assure this by making sure it's as good as what we used to do before, you know, criterion referencing does start to look like a prison at this point. It might be entirely attractive. So. Yeah, and by the way, when I got to that conference, when the thing opened, it opened with an iPad orchestra. You know, kids all jumped up and they're playing. You know, whereas 5 years before that would have been traditional Chinese instruments that would have been learned generation upon generation. And it's iPad orchestra, and this chap was in from the States, leapt up to video them using their iPads, and was completely lost in what they were doing. Forgot to press the record button. I mean, it's quite an interesting little sort of. And the girl, by the way, is she's singing, but she's modulating her voice in a little voice modulator. So she's modulating her voice in real time as she sings. It's pretty fab. So yeah, I do think we're moving away from that uniformity, pretty spectacularly. And the places where learning happens, you know, is TK Park in Bangkok, you know, which is an interesting learning space, but it's built in the 6th floor of a shopping mall. And this is a space built for learning. Shoes off, by the way. It's a space built for learning by families and grandparents and so on. So yeah, no, pretty exciting times, I think. And just as the old training manager would have done it the same way, I think that uniformity is the Morris Marina curriculum. You know, fatal. Yeah. There was a question.
Something that's slightly disturbing that I found in Australia is the number of people who are suggesting that they don't want to send their kids to school till the age of 7. What's your response to that sort of atomic learning where the only exposure a child gets is to their parents or to a small group of people satellite?
It's a really interesting question, because again, if we'd been having the chat 10 years ago, you know, home learning. They were a funny old bunch, you know, and some home learners do the most extraordinary stuff, you know, really good, kids find themselves in home learning, sometimes, often because of bullying or things have gone wrong. Story in today's Metro, I think, of a kid being bullied and put in isolation by the school because he's being bullied. Like, you know, at that point, you take your children away, don't you? So there are good reasons, but also there were reasons of you know, people had particular religious fervours and, you know, books of the work of the devil or whatever, you know. So there are all sorts of funny reasons. But what happens is this, you know, people plus technology breaks cartels. And, you know, some great illustrations of that we might just dwell on for a moment. So here's Gareth Edwards, famously with, I think I'll turn the sound off from this as it plays. So did you see this movie? This is Monsters. Oh, you should. If you haven't, if you got movies, I'm a BAFTA judge. I come to the BAFTA Awards. If you didn't see Monsters last year, you should see Monsters. You don't see one movie this year, see Hugo. I think probably. But Monsters was shot. Gareth made computer graphics. He was employed by the industry to do that. Well, as he made movies, he kept saying to himself, "Blimey, I could do better. You know, I could so make my own movie." And in the end, he rustled up $500,000, and they kind of busked the movie. There was no script. They went out on the road. This is an allegory of Baghdad, really. It's a future world where aliens have landed, and strangely, really bad things happen every so often. People are trying to carry on, live their lives in amongst it all, and it is very allegorical, very powerful. But it's a road trip. It's a buddy movie. Gareth only had enough money for one actor, and the actor had a girlfriend. She'd made some quite interesting movies actually. Not often with that many clothes on. But there's a real chemistry there, utterly fab, and it's just the most extraordinary movie. All made effectively, you know, in his bedroom, and on the, you know, they got into trouble. They just turned up at places and started filming. They hadn't got any permissions. This is people plus technology breaks cartels. So the $500,000, I voted for that my film of the year. I voted for that ahead of the King's Speech. You know, it was that good, or the King's Speech was that bad. Depends how you view it. You know, here's you've all seen this kind of stuff. I'm not suggesting there's any merit in Charlie Bit My Finger, but flipping heck, you know, that's 250 million hits is not bad going, and you've seen the impact, I think, of 3D printers. Suddenly with 3D printers, you don't need to be a manufacturing organisation to make stuff. You just have to have a 3D printer, and look, there's an object printed on a 3D printer. You know, you can print things you couldn't manufacture any other way. People plus technology breaks cartels. Now, what's this got to do with your question? The answer is, for sure, education, that will be too. You know, and the smart parents at home have got a lot of options. You know, they've got, you look at what Apple just released the other day with their, I mean, what was interesting about the whole iBook thing, you know, the Twitter sphere is awash with people complaining about the copyright rules, which do seem to be strangely draconian, but hey, it's Apple. But they also say, if you just give the stuff away, you know, there's no rules really, just give it away. Now, I happened to run the Courseware Trust up in Scotland back in the 80s when we had Hypercard, and we gave away software which had been written by teachers. We gave them a little bit of money to finesse it, and we gave it to every school in Scotland. Hugely powerful. And by the end of the year, you know, every school was receiving 50 or 60 pieces of really good courseware written by teachers for teachers. It's not hard to imagine the power of a huge number of parents and grandparents starting to exchange that capability and building, you know, and not having a kid sat in a room with a lonely life, but building something really quite exciting. Look, here's, I ran for 10 years a project of reconnecting children who have been excluded from school, which we then fed on into a university degree, ultra-university degree, where they were all non-standard. Everybody followed their own bespoke degree, did their own work. And I've only put this up really to show you this. So here's a child who's been excluded from school, and here she is just starting a university degree, and she's chatting away here about she's chatting away here about this is her learning journal she's decided to keep, who am I, and so on. But rather excitingly, you know, I think those words at the top, you know, made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. I couldn't have been more excited. But she's learned, you know, entirely from Andy and at home, and then gone on to do, you know, a distance degree on her own, but feels like she's part of a community of a heap of others. And I'm sorry, this is like the world's longest answer, but it's such a key question. You know, look what happened when we gave that power to parents themselves, because it gets really interesting. If you've got parents at home, how do they get to be in a position to help their children learn? And the answer is, I'm graduating. I have a mammalogy degree for parents, so you can. Here's two parents chatting.
I wouldn't have survived without people like yourself and stuff there, especially in the first year. I found it really tough and different things and stuff.
No idea why the video's not running at all, but that's...
stuff, and it became a team, although we never met, I think...
Hang on, I do have an idea. I maybe have a strategy here.
Forward to doing other support things and stuff, it's opened quite a few doors that I would never have had opened without it.
You'll have to live without them speaking, but...
much more supportive in comparison. I wouldn't have survived without people like yourself.
So, you know, crucially there, this is a community of reflective practice, and their parents, and their research task is to be better parents. And so I do think the game's all changed, and I think, you know, if schools can't be more seductive and more engaging, that sense of moving through. I was just Skyping into the virtual school in Michigan. I had a hand in setting up last week. Said to the kids, why is this working so well for you? They've dropped out of school, they're working, they come in, they show that they can understand how to work online, then they go and work from home. And one of them said, the thing is I can get my credits twice as fast here as I could at school. So the kid has dropped out, reporting on the speed they can go. So, you know, the game is up really, I think, for traditional uniformity and stage and age and all the other things that gallop along. There will be significant virtual schools. There will be fab, and you can see News International and Pearson and heaps of people moving into that space, as will the not-for-profit crowd too. Look, time for two more questions and one very quick thing. Yeah.
Hi there. Philip Wilson, BMJ Learning. I've just been thinking about the contrast between what I did in formal education and what I've learned about technology. And I've learned about technology. My parents thought I was playing with my computer in my bedroom when I was 13. I've spent a lot of time, you might grandly call doing professional development, probably looked as if I was reading stuff on the internet and playing around with software. I'm just interested what you thought about what can be done to sort of facilitate people or help them get the most from that sort of diffuse learning where they're looking all over for things that probably don't exist as formal courses.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised to find half of us in this room were you know, assuredly polymathic, you know, and that it was that flitting that turned out to be so valuable in employment terms. But there is hard learning too, there's stuff you need to know. I'm just curious enough, last week I had a group of children, we thought we'd teach the program from scratch in 4 days. Very much that, you know, here's a computer, good luck. And they were 11-year-olds, and one of the things we found that they needed before we could get started was some stuff from the 1970s. So I had to dust off this old sort of logic board, you know, so they could work out some basic concepts really before they could get going. What was interesting about that was that this was in the Bet show in Olympia, and I needed 5 volts to make the board work. I went around the whole Bet show trying to find a 5-volt power supply. I couldn't even buy a battery, you know, because everything was locked down. So I went to a stand who sold USB wires. You can just about see at the top there, you know. And I said, I'd like to buy a USB wire. Have you got a pair of wire cutters? And I cut the end off and just taped it onto the board, and the board did that. And they looked at me as though I was some sort of, you know, I'd come from another planet, you know. I was just, look, it's USB, the 5 volts is 2 wires, it's not hard, you know. It's really not difficult. So I think we've fatally not let kids take the lids off things in a way that makes that sort of learning really difficult. I think we've got to, but I'm very encouraged by the whole, you know, maker movement in technology, you know, and kids suddenly making and creating and doing the things that you described in quite an exciting way. You know, here's you know, things like squishy circuits, for example. Squishy circuits, like kids are all making conductive dough and they're building, you know, Play-Doh digital models in a really interesting sort of way. So suddenly, that whole kind of lids off stuff is really quite exciting. And it's as though a generation missed out. You had a sort of engineering generation, you had to that's a flash, I better stop. You had a kind of engineering generation who had Meccano and things, and then you had a digital generation who did play in their bedrooms with their, you know, the whole of the British games industry is built on the back of those old Spectrum programmers, really, in truth. You know. And then the kids were told to learn how to use PowerPoint or whatever ghastly things they were given, and that generation really missed out. And I think it's a real worry. But now we're suddenly back into, and where's all this innovation coming from? It's coming from the kids and those young teachers all over again. It's not coming from ministers, but as I said at the beginning, you know, the ministers have said, let's step back and let's let it all in. Look, just to leave you with, really, this is kind of a useful summary. I've spent a lot of time, 15 years, building big online learning communities, and you know, they were all pretty exciting. We were in Guinness Book of Records, biggest learning community in the world, and so on. What characterised all of them are those words along the bottom. You know, they were those collegiate, mixed age, very global, cool, project-based, 24/7 thing. Now, what I found myself doing it by 2004 was building spaces for learning that were all those things. These are built just not a million miles from where we were. These are the Ingeniums. Search for Ingenium online, you'll find them. And so I suddenly realised that the physical learning spaces we were building are predicated by about 15 years by the virtual space. What we do online prototypes what we do face to face by about a decade and a half. So, you know, those of you who are in physical learning spaces, you want to know where they're going to be by 2025, it's flipping obvious. It's where they are online now. And it's that list, and I'll tell you, it's a scary list. We've got no business model online at all, have we, at the moment? You know, I know what the business model for YouTube is. I remember talking to Nicholas when he set up Skype, said, what's your business model, mate? And he said, I haven't got one, but we think half the phone calls in the world will be free. We think we'll have half of them. If that's true, we probably won't need a business model, will we? Big smile, you know. So, you know, I don't think there's a business model for learning. I think that characterises where we are online. That characterises what training and learning is going to be like in the institutions and organisations that survive to 2025. The ones that survive will survive on the back of learning, not on the back of anything else. And you can feel that chasm opening up at the moment, real chasm. So it's an exciting time, and I guess a lot of what we're doing here is to have conversations to try and make sure you've arrived at the station, the train's pulling out, you look at the train, you see a few faces you recognise on the train, you don't actually know where the train's going, you could run and jump on, or you could wait, take a breath and catch the next one. If you run and jump on, you might just make it. If you wait for the next train, the other guys will have long since gone, and you won't make it. So that's where we are. You know, I hope as you look around the conference, you'll see a few familiar faces. I hope you'll like the train they're on and jump on it. I don't know where it's going, nor do you. But I'll tell you what, it's better than where we've been, and that's pretty encouraging. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Stephen. I hope you found that as enjoyable and stimulating as I did. A fascinating session, but so many ideas to explore further. But as Stephen was suggesting, you need time for those neural pathways to be formed and taxonomies to be created, and also for calories to be loaded in. So thanks, Stephen, for finishing on time, and again for such a fantastic session. Have a really good break. See you back after lunch.